Well, my watch says that it's 8 o'clock here on the East Coast. That means it's 5 o'clock on the West Coast, and nobody has any idea what time it is in Arizona because they don't do that daylight savings time thing or wherever. Thanks for joining us. It's Manuscript Monday. My name is Brian Cathanis. I'm your host and moderator. Our special guest tonight is Ken Gloss. He is just incredible, and we're looking forward to hearing him go. Just a couple of housekeeping things. I just sent everyone a text in the chat message there, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A or chat. I have my cell phone there. You can text me if you have tech questions, having trouble hearing, having trouble seeing, can't place any bets online or something like that. You let me know. That's my cell phone number. Please don't call me because I'm in the middle of a webinar, but I'd be happy when Ken is chatting to see if I can respond that way too. If you have questions, we're going to have plenty of time for that. I suggest you write them down, or at any time during the presentation, just drop it into the Q&A section there too. I'm going to share my screen to get us started here, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing tonight and let you screens open here. There we go. Good. So welcome to Manuscript Monday. We do this the first Monday of the month. We've been doing it for about 2 years. I'm your host. I've been doing it for about 2 years right along with you. We're glad you joined us tonight. We have a lot going on. We got a hard stop at 9 o'clock, so you can plan on that. We won't run over because we don't do that. So let me tell you what's going on here tonight. Who's the sponsor? The sponsor is the Manuscript Society, celebrating our 75th year. And we're in the business of helping people learn more about manuscripts, preserving manuscripts, have all kinds of programs, including a scholarship fund and a few publications that I know you'll enjoy. If you're a member, you're probably reading them this week because a new issue of manuscripts just came out. And if not, you can become one. We'll talk about that. Why a webinar? Well, it is, the 21st century or the 22nd century, whatever century it is. And it's a great way to reach people in the most inexpensive way, in the fastest way, and the easiest way possible. Why now? Why not? It's a great time to learn about manuscripts, about books, about all kinds of interesting collectibles. People who collect manuscripts probably collect books, and people who collect books probably collect manuscripts and autographs and who knows what else. We've invited members of most of the appraisal societies, a lot of the book associations and bookseller associations, certainly the members of the Manuscript Society, some appraisal groups, and our friends from the Society of American Archivists are also part of that, along with other book collecting societies as well. What we're going to cover, I'll tell you that in just a little bit, and how you can get more information, I'll tell you about that too in just a moment. So with that, let me tell you what we're going to cover. Actually, I'll let you read this because you can certainly read this and I don't need to do that. Take a look and see what's going to happen tonight. So with that in mind, let me tell you a little about Ken. He's a rare book specialist and an appraiser. You've probably seen him on national television among many, many shows. He belongs to a variety of organizations, including the Antiquarian Booksellers Association, the League of Antiquarian Booksellers, the New England Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America. He's at all the book fairs all over the place. You'll see him everywhere. Massachusetts and Rhode Island Antiquarian Booksellers Association, the Committee for Boston International Aquarium Book Fair, and the Boston Society. He's also a fellow of the Massachusetts Historical Society and serves on the board of overseers of the USS Constitution. I don't think he's an admiral, but he could be if he wanted to with all that thing there too. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ken. Ken, are you still with us?
I'm definitely still with you and happy to talk. And basically what I do in a talk is I give a little bit of my background and history, tell a lot of stories, anecdotes of places I've seen, people I've been to, and tell a little bit about the Antiques Roadshow, and then do some question and answer, because I can go on and on and on and on about old books. At least with question and answer, I can talk about what you want to listen to. In the last minute or two of the talk, I'll tell a few more stories. But first of all, the history of the Brattle Bookshop goes back to the 1800s, but for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My father was getting married. My mother had $500, and with that, they bought half interest in the Brattle Bookshop. And my father built the store with his great love of books, his hard work, his knowledge, and he was also a bit of a character and a showman. We've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal. And every time my father would move, when it was planned, he'd move the best books over to his new location, then run sales, half price, 50 cent, quarter, dime. Last day of the sale, though, everything was free. And he would literally have hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever, ring a big bell, people go charging in, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again, they'd leave, next group would come in, and he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this was in 1969, and we were moving from the end of Washington Street in Boston to West Street, where we are now. And at the end of the giveaway, there were books left over. And like I say, my father was a bit of a character and a showman, and if you can picture this, he hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team. And on the cover of the covered wagon, it said, "Go West, book lovers, go 5 West Street, Brattle Bookshop." And they drove it, for those of you who know Boston, from Boston City Hall, up Court Street, down by the Boston Common to where West Street was, and back down Washington Street with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Well, the superintendent in charge of traffic was a friend of his, told him he could do it all morning, but within an hour, the city was at an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He had gotten his point across. And when we first moved in, we were in a 5-story, 50-year-old wooden building, crammed full of books. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning. The building was on fire, and it literally burnt to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone. And essentially, we had no insurance. Our insurance didn't cover the demolition of the building. For those of you who own buildings, make sure you have demolition insurance. In any case, but we wanted to keep going, not go out of business. We found a storefront a few doors down the street. We rented folding tables. People either sold, gave us, donated books. The mayor at the time, Kevin White in Boston, came down with a carload of books. And even though it was a meager stock, within a month we reopened. And the main thing was just to keep going. We didn't want to go out of business. Next 4 years, we slowly but surely rebuilt the stock. 4 years after that, we bought the building we're in now. And it's sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5, 2 floors of general used books, and then a 3rd floor with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, leather bindings, and whatever else. And that type of business, especially in the inner cities, is a dying business. And it's not dying because people don't like books, buy books, sell books, read books, but particularly in the inner cities, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores, which I can assure you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, one right after the other have been going out of business. And in the recent years, the internet has helped speed that along. Now, like I say, we bought our building in the 80s. I hope to do this for years to come. I have daughters who are in their 30s. I don't think they plan to come into it the way I have, but I have 3 grandchildren. The oldest is 3. So all I have to do is last another 20 years or so, and they can come into it the way I did. And I've done this all my life. My parents say my first word was book. I don't know, maybe it was. And I worked after school in elementary school, junior high school, summers during college. I have a degree in chemistry from the University of Massachusetts. I was going to get a doctorate in the University of Wisconsin, but in 1973, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now has been over 50 years, and I don't regret for a minute that I'm doing this and not in a laboratory somewhere. And one of the fun parts about it is the people you meet, the ones you see, the stories, the houses you go to, the items you get to touch and hold, and even sometimes the people who work for us. When I first took over, my father got sick a few years later, but I had hired a new employee. He had been working for us for about a week or two, and an older man came in. He asked for an obscure novelist named Doniford Yates. I knew who Doniford Yates was. We went to the fiction, looked. We didn't have anything. At the time, we had index cards to keep records of people who wanted, said, "Do you want to leave your name?" He said, "No, I'll come back another time," and left. My new employee comes up to me and goes, "Does that man come in here often?" And I said, I wasn't paying that much attention. No, and I said, I didn't really recognize it. He said, oh, well, that was J.D. Salinger. I used to date his daughter. And, you know, who knows? And this same employee one time gave, within another week or two, gave one of the most interesting and unforgettable introductions. My wife likes to say, although she works at the store now, that she used to work for the local Boston professional basketball team. And we had 4 tickets to the Celtics. And we said, Hugh, do you want to go to the game with us? And he said, well, yeah, but let me take 2 tickets. I'll meet you there. So my wife and I, we go there. He's sitting there with a woman, and he looks at us and goes, this is my wife, Mickey. We're getting divorced tomorrow. What do you say to an introduction like that? And that's the way things went for years. But that's a lot of the fun of what the business is. And for me, one of the great joys of the business is going out to houses and estates. It's how we get most of our books. It's almost like being Jim Hawkins on Treasure Island every day. You never know who you're going to meet, who you're going to see, the people, the places. And I'll relate a few of those stories to you, and then I'll tell some more stories. I was out of the store. This was a while ago, and I got a message that a Mrs. Fisher had called, and she had some books. I called her up, and she said, oh, yes, we have about 500 art reference books. My father died in Providence. Would you be interested? We're inviting a number of dealers down to bid on them. First of all, 500 art reference books sounded interesting. Providence is only an hour away. We go all over the Northeast, New England, Boston, further in many cases. So an hour to get to Providence was really no problem. They lived in an old street called Benefit Street up near Brown University. I get to the house. It was a large old colonial house. Get led through the house into a courtyard, into a garage. Second floor of the garage, they had 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthiest families in the country. And after 6 months, I bought 80% of the books I wanted. I was happy. She was happy. And she said, my mother has a lot of books. Some are being sold at auction. Most are being given to the university. But would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Well, their house in Newport was one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the things that was fascinating about it was being in one of these mansions that was still being lived in by a family. And at one point, wandering from the basement to the attic, all on my own, without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, don't do this or don't do that. It was fun. Now, another time we got called to another mansion, not quite as big as the Brown family, to do an appraisal. Now, I do hundreds of free appraisals, either on the Antiques Roadshow, on the phone, giving people ideas nowadays through emails, pictures, and so on, giving ideas of value. But this was something that they needed for tax purposes. And anyways, I negotiated with that. But another mansion, not quite as big as Brown's, this was the Perry family. Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry. And what they had was a whole stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. And it was the day-to-day accountings of the ships. And sometimes they would capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. Then one day, one of the ships got hit into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. About 3 days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of a page, and it said, Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg. So things have changed a little. When my father was still alive, and he died in 1985, so over 30 years ago, we got a call from a lady. She was very, very vague about her name, who she was, what she had, but it sounded like she might have some things interesting, and she was close by. Got to her house, little ranch house, paint was peeling, weeds were growing, and you sort of say, gee, what's going to be here? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. We walk in, and there were just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful antiques. Turned out she was from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution, and she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe and all the court intrigues, all the goings on, how T.E. Shaw used to stay at her house, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. She went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out her books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And on one of her walls, she had 10 watercolors. And when I first walked in, I thought they were nice. And the more she talked and the longer I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, those 10 watercolors, they're really nice. And she turned around and said, oh, yes, they're all Turners. So she had 10 original Turner watercolors, probably $1 million worth of painting. And it was just, oh, yeah, they're all nice. And so a lot of times it's the people and the characters. A few years ago, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday party, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona giving a lecture, he's been asked to speak in Florida, and he's also been asked to speak in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo's a long way to go? And he said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo's a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who could tell you about one day sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. He was a much younger man, obviously. And he said he was really excited about this dinner and all the learning and insight he was going to get from these two men. He got to the table a little bit early. Said 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat down next to him. And about 15 minutes later, Edison came in. Now, Edison was quite elderly, had one of those big horns for hearing. And he said the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, my Tom, you look very good. And Edison turned to Ford and yelled, it's the Carter's little liver pills. This man said all they did was yell about Carter's little liver pills all night long. Said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. Now, I can go on and on and on with these stories, but there was we get hundreds of phone calls at the store, people wanting to know, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Well, what's the value? How much is it worth? And on and on. Most of those, either I or the people I work with, we can answer right off the top of our heads. Some are a little more involved, and occasionally you really have to do some research, but that can be fun. But every once in a while, you get a call that really stands out. And I answered the phone, hello, Brattle Bookshop, can I help you? Lady, elderly, very thick Irish brogue. And the first thing she says is, President Kennedy slept with me. I have to admit that gets your attention. And she stopped and waited for it to sink in. And it turns out she had worked for the Kennedy family. And when he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but maybe not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Now, handwritten letters from a later 20th century president, were interesting. She wanted to get an offer on them. Quite honestly, I was skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. I went to her house. She was fabulous, great stories. The letters, I really liked them. I gave her what I thought was a tremendous offer. Much as I suspected, though, there was no way she could sell these letters. The letters were part of her life. As far as I left a note behind, as far as I know, her family still has them, probably where they belong. Who knows? Maybe someday I'll hear about them. And and that's almost an everyday thing. We are constantly going out to houses and estates. Recently, we just moved 30,000 books out of an estate in New Hampshire. Sometimes it's just a single book. And many times people ask me, well, what are some of the real interesting finds over the years, or things that really stand out to you, or appointments you've gone on? And I'll relate a few of those to you. And sort of another question that comes of that, do I collect books? And I'll answer that, no, I don't. And although with a provision, when I was growing up, my father used to bring 5, 6, 7, 8 books a day home. Do that for 30 or 40 years, and you can imagine what our house looked like. He always meant to read a chapter, a dust jacket, introduction, but they just kept coming and coming. So I read a lot. I read a lot about book collecting. I read a lot of history. I like Stephen King and John Grisham. Matter of fact, there's a John Grisham book about book theft called Camino Island. And this is sort of a story. In any case, if you read the book, and you'll understand why I consider it a story. But John, I have a signed copy of that book. John Grisham says he owes me a dinner. I don't know if I'll ever get it, but read through the book and you'll understand what part of that issue was. But one time I got a call. I was at an Antiques Roadshow I was in Sheboygan at a museum, and my staff called, said, John Grisham called. They don't know if it's really him. I called him, and he was saying, I heard you didn't like the book, and there was issues. Anyways, he owes me a dinner. But my wife used to collect books on jazz and jazz history, roots music, and she also had a tremendous collection of signed studio photos, and some of them were really great. She had U.B. Blake signing to W.C. Handy. Her favorite one, though, is she had, it wasn't a studio picture per se, but it was a picture of a marquee and a poster. And it was a concert for Louis Armstrong. And down the poster, it said featuring Billie Holiday. And it was inscribed, to Pops, who taught me everything, Billie. Now, we recently downsized, so we found somebody who really, really wanted her collection. She was happy that it went to a good place. We just didn't have room for it. Now, another collection that we have that started as a bit of a joke, there were a lot of people who collect, before they had dust jackets, a lot of books had somewhat decorative covers, especially before World War I. And these decorative covers, you can go to library sales, bookstores, whatever, pick up very cheaply. Some are expensive, but very cheaply. They don't seem like much, but decoratively, as a group, they can be quite interesting. And I started a collection like this as a joke. One day I got a book in and had a picture of a toilet on the cover. And the title was Flushed with Pride, The Life of Thomas Crapper. Brought it home. I showed it to my wife. She took one look at it and said, we have to put that in the bathroom. So we did. A couple of days later, I got another book that had a big eye staring out of the cover. The title was We Never Sleep. It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. But with a big eye staring at you, I thought, put that in the bathroom too. Now, this is a little half bathroom, no shower, no steam. Next thing you know, we built bookshelves. And now in that bathroom, there are about 400 of these decoratively illustrated books. People walk in, they're a little taken aback, loads and loads of reading material. And one of the rules of the collection is that nothing can be valuable, because every once in a while, a book will fall off the shelf. And you can imagine where they end up. Now, one thing I do, and nobody's going to really be able to see this, but I have sheets of paper that I collect. And page after page after page, that you'll see there's like one word, one line, one sentence, single space. And every single one of those is a story about books, about book collecting, about signed books, autographs. That's what I collect, and I keep writing them down and keep telling the stories. And we've run into some really interesting things. I remember one of the books that's very popular as a collectible now is The Great Gatsby. With a dust jacket, it can go for incredible amounts of money, into the tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But my father had a copy of it, and it was the first edition, but not in very good condition. But when you opened it up, it was inscribed to the greatest living poet, T.S. Eliot, sincerely F. Scott Fitzgerald. But beyond that, T.S. Eliot, when he read the book, annotated and crossed out and made corrections in just about every page of the book. that book now would be worth 2, 3, maybe even $500,000 because of the Great Association. And I get called into places, and I sometimes are doing things for museums. And one time I got called by a museum that I'm a member of, and they wanted me to just give a quick figure for insurance. It wasn't for anything else. They were loaning something to another museum. And I said, I'll do it for free, but I don't want to do it from a website. I don't want to do it from a copy. I want to see the original. They said, fine, make an appointment, come in. I'm sitting there holding a 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's Ride by Paul Revere. I don't care how much you can deal with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, but touching and holding things signed by Washington, Lincoln, Adams, Einstein, Paul Revere, it sends a chill up my spine every time. Another time I got called to the Merrimack River, a small town, and a little ranch house. There was a Second World War type ranch house, nothing special. Nobody said too much. They had mentioned a few interesting books. I walk into the house. They had a few interesting books. There's a kitchen table with a big roll of paper on it. And it was the manuscript for On the Road, the original manuscript. I got to pick it up. I got to touch it, hold it. I unrolled it at a couple of feet. It was 120 feet long. It was way too fragile to look at wood, but I actually got it and saw it. Turned out the person who I saw, Jack Kerouac, was his uncle. Now that eventually went on to be sold at auction for a few $1 million, but I got to hold it and touch it. Another time, and this was again an appraisal, but I got called out to a museum, a college, a local college. And again, they didn't essentially say what it was, but I majored in chemistry. And one of the books they had was a first edition of Principia Mathematica by Isaac Newton in the 1600s. In and of itself, it's a $1 million book. This was Isaac Newton's copy with its notes in the margins. I mean, I'm standing there, I'm holding, I'm touching Isaac Newton's copy of Principia. Now, it went from the college in Wellesley, Mass. to MIT. Now it's at the Huntington Library. The last book fair in Pasadena that I went to, my wife and I went to the Huntington Library. We found the glass case it was in, and I looked at it and said, I touched that. I mean, just touching it is a thrill. One last one on quick appraisals. My manager and I got called to an institution. We went down the basement, plain basement, folding table, 3 documents sitting on the table, the Bill of Rights, the Pilgrim Charter, and a printed copy of the Declaration of Independence. There was a year later, the first one with the names on it, but across the top in ink, it said, this is a true and authentic copy, and it was signed by John Hancock. I have to admit, I did put my pinky finger on each item. Now, where these are now is this is in the Massachusetts State Archives, right across the street from the Kennedy Library. So if any of you go to the Kennedy Library, make sure also to walk across just a little parking lot and go to the Commonwealth Museum, and these documents are there. I mean, it's amazing what you can find. Now, it's also sometimes interesting what interests people and what leads to collections. We had a man who collected postcards, just, European mostly, relatively common postcards. But what he loved about them was trying to figure out where they were. I mean, if you think about it, if you have a postcard and it says some square, and you're talking about Europe, and it might be in the early 1900s, and it doesn't say what countries it's in, the way Europe has changed, the way towns have changed, names have changed, discovering and searching for where that is. So this man, because of his postcard collection, built one of the largest collections on atlases, European histories, travel guides, and so on, a massive collection, all built because he wanted to know where the postcards were. And he would every once in a while take a trip to Europe and try to actually find the places. But I found that fascinating. And what people will sometimes want. I got called once to buy 2,000 cookbooks. They were really good cookbooks. But there was also a box of these pamphlets like Baker Chocolate Company, Gold Medal Flour, How to Make Jello. They can be nice, decorative, but they're not terribly valuable. I mean, there are some things. I said to one of my assistants, look, we've got to spend time on these old, rare cookbooks. Just put these out on the dollar table. There are going to be some bargains, but let them be bargains. We don't have the time right now. About 2 or 3 hours later, a man comes running in and with a pamphlet, and he goes, I've been looking for this for years and years and years. And it's hard to describe how thrilled he was, how beside himself he was. And he went on and on. And finally, I looked at the pamphlet, and the title was Coconuts and Constipation. You never know what people are looking for, or you also never know what you're going to run into with it. One of the frustrating things, and I'm going to get to the Antiques Roadshow a little bit, there are some great stories about that. One of the frustrating things that can happen, we go out almost every single day to houses and estates. Now, one of the things about being in the used book business is maybe the autograph business is it's incredibly physical. If you buy 1,000 books in a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather, you've got to carry 1,000 books out of a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. And a job interview for the Brattle Bookshop starts like this. Do you have any athletic injuries, back injuries, arm injuries, anything that would prevent you from carrying a lot of books? Then we asked, do you have any allergies for dust, mold, mildew, whatever? After all of that, then we say, well, where did you go to school? What's your interest? So that's a little bit of the background of a used bookstore. But we go out almost every day. Some are very good, some are general, some are just used books. But every once in a while, you make an appointment, someone calls up that morning and says, I'm sorry, childcare issues, I'm sick, something's come up. You understand, but whatever, but you've blocked out that time and you just do it. We had a friend of ours, and this was, again, a number of years ago, and he was having some financial difficulties. He had a storage area in the Boston metropolitan area. It was a good storage area. It had lights and electricity, but he wanted to sell some of his books, and he made an appointment, and he called the day of the appointment, and postponed it. We rescheduled. He called, postponed, rescheduled, called, postponed, rescheduled, called, postponed. And I finally said, Russ, if you postpone on us again, I'm not coming out. I just can't do this. So the day of the appointment comes and he goes, calls up and he goes, you can't come. You have to change it. I have to postpone. He says, but it's not my fault. And he goes on to explain, and this is sort of a sad story. The lady next to him had a storage area, and she had an abusive husband who ran out on the family 20 years before. He was an alcoholic and so on. But the night before our appointment, she was on her deathbed, and her daughter was in the hospital with her. And she told her daughter, I have a storage area in Cambridge. I want you to go there tomorrow. In the storage area is a freezer. In the freezer is your father. She had murdered him 20 years before, put him in a freezer, and nobody missed him. And it was on the news that night. The police were there. And I said, okay, Russ, we'll reschedule this one. I've never had an excuse like that since. Matter of fact, I even looked it up recently to make sure that actually did happen. And when you look it up, it starts with bizarre story. One of the things that I've done, which is I absolutely love, is I've appraised on the Antiques Roadshow for over 20 years. And Well, one of the things people don't realize about the Antiques Roadshow, they don't pay the appraisers anything. We don't get airfare, hotel, meals, but 8.5 million people watch the show. And it's what a wonderful way to see the country. Why would I ever go to Fargo, Boise, Omaha, or many other places? But anywhere you go in this country, and I'm very fortunate because usually my wife can come with me, and usually we can go a few days early and actually see the towns. Anywhere you go in this country, if you spend a little time, it's absolutely beautiful. The people are absolutely wonderful. Don't talk about politics and religion. But what a great joy to be able to do that. But the way that show works is there's no guarantee that you're going to get on television. And all the appraisers want to get on, but you don't know what's coming in. In the ideal, you appraise on one day from about 7 in the morning, sometimes till 7 at night, 3 book appraisers next to jewelry, next to posters, so on and so forth. 3,000 or so people, 3,000 to 4,000 people come to a show. Each person has 2 items. 6,000 to 8,000 items get appraised. They film a little over 100 to make up 3 hours of TV. Ideal day for an appraiser at the Antiques Roadshow is around 9 o'clock in the morning. Someone comes in with something. You call on a producer over. They talk to you about it. They talk to the guest. There's something interesting. They say, go ahead, tape it. You tape by 9:30, you've taped something. The rest of the day is easy. If it's 3, 4 in the afternoon and you haven't gotten anything good, you start getting a lot more nervous that you won't. And a few of the things that stand out in Antique Roadshow appraisals, I'll tell you 2 of mine and one that my wife did. I had a man come in, it was in Kansas City early in the morning. He had a few things from Pope John Paul, nothing terribly special, a signature, whatever. But then he pulls out some pictures, 8 by 10 pictures. It turned out he was the pilot who flew the Pope and his entourage around the country. And he started telling stories about what was going on behind the scenes. And then there was one great picture. It was usually when you see the Pope in a picture with a person, it's very formal. They're in vestments. He's got his arm out. You're kissing the ring. They take a picture. You get it. But this picture, a pilot was in his uniform and he was sitting in the pilot seat. The Pope was in his full vestments, leaning over with one leg in the air, reaching over the pilot and signing his Bible. And I'm going, oh, this is great. And I go to the man, I go, okay, let me see the Bible. He goes, oh, I didn't bring that. And I go, can you go get it? And he goes, no, it's in a safe deposit box. And I go, ugh. I ended up taping something later in the day, but another time at the Antiques Roadshow, someone brought in a folk art box. It was from the Civil War period, nice folk art. It went to the folk art table. They said, you know, that's nice, nothing great, but there were a few papers in the bottom of the box. So they brought it over to me to look at that. There was sort of a normal, the man who had been in the Civil War, he was in the hospital in Washington. He had dysentery or diarrhea, as he said, but it was a 4-page handwritten letter home, just sort of saying, it was a standard letter. Please write to me more. I enjoy it. How's Aunt Judy? How's Uncle this? I was doing this, on and on for 4 pages. Pretty standard letter. At the very end of the letter, there's a little parentheses, and it says, written by his friend, Walt Whitman. So this letter was a 4-page letter, all in his handwriting. And it was pretty amazing. Someone's, and it was one of the more interesting things I praised. And of course, if people knew who Walt Whitman was, they saved his letters. But these written from the hospital when he was a volunteer, many of those people had no idea who Walt Whitman was. So those are incredibly rare and valuable. And at the time was $10,000 or $15,000. One last story, and then I'll see about some questions, and then I have more stories. By the way, if you like these type of stories, I do a podcast called Brattlecast. I have about 100 plus 20-minute episodes, so Brattlecast. But my wife did the Antiques Roadshow for a few years. She didn't enjoy as much 12 hours of standing there talking to people and so on. So she doesn't do it anymore. She sometimes behind the scenes. But she was appraising at the time, and a lady comes in, and you have to realize that people have to be in a lottery to get tickets. Many of them drive hundreds of miles to get to the show. They wait in a line to get in to find out what line they're supposed to wait in next. So you try to be very, very nice, and whatever people bring, you touch it, look at it, talk to them, give them some time. This lady comes in and she goes, "I have a book signed by A. Lincoln." And my wife very nicely looks at the book, opens it up, and after she looks at it, she says, "It is signed by A. Lincoln, but not the A. Lincoln we both want it to be." And the lady very gruffly says, "Well, how can you tell?" And my wife takes the book and opens it up and turns to the title page. She says, "Well, the first clue is this book was printed in 1915. And the lady goes, "So?" And my wife goes, "Well, I learned in school that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. And the lady goes, slams the book shut, goes, "You don't know what you're talking about," and storms off. And, it sounds a little bit absurd. And of course, it's an extreme case. But when people want something to be what they want it to be so badly that they can convince themselves it's that. Now, in this case, it was very obvious, but I know many times I've gotten a letter in a document, a rare book, a first edition, and I've looked at it and said, "Oh, this is great. This is fabulous. Look what I've got." And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm saying, is there's something a little off. And what I've learned over the years is you do not have to know everything about everything. Matter of fact, it's impossible. And matter of fact, if you did know everything about everything, it would be boring. All you need to know is who does know. And you have to be on good enough terms with them that if you get in touch with them, they'll pick up the phone or answer you. So, I always point out that even if there's that little bit of doubt, talking to a colleague, talking to a friend, reassuring and making sure, because you can convince yourself of almost anything if that's what you really want. Now, Ryan, I'll just say at this point, I can go on with stories nonstop, but if there are some questions, I can answer some of those. And quite honestly, anything you ask me, I can go off on a tangent.
I'm sure you can. This has been fascinating. It gets us right at about 40 minutes, which is about what we talked about. So let me take this screen over. Let me do some housekeeping here with the Manuscript Society. Then let's open it up to questions. And if you have questions for Ken, just type it into the Q&A. I'll read them off to him, and then we'll see where we go. And I have a few for him as well. So this is a good time to think about what questions you want to ask. So that's what we're talking about. So Ken's been our guest. We're going to leave Ken on. He's going to answer some questions for us and got a couple of stories to close with. And with that, let me go on to let you know what's going on. But wait, there is more, like they say in those infomercials. At the end of this webinar, you're going to get an email from us that says if you watch live, it'll say, "Thanks for joining us." And it'll that letter explains that it's been 1 hour and we've done this, that, and the other thing. And that way, that's your certificate of attendance if you want to use it for continuing education or professional development points or things like that. Hang on to that. I can't reproduce that for you. And if not, you can always go watch the webinar again, and then you can write down to whatever organization you're trying to get some credit for hours for. You can explain what the webinar was all about. You can watch this webinar at any time. It's been recorded. The link will be posted on the Manuscript Society website. There'll be a link to our Manuscript Society YouTube channel where you're going to find a lot of our other interesting things that have been out here on all of the webinars we've been doing for the past couple of years. Other thing to take a look at right here is I want to thank our special guest, Ken Gloss, for being with us. It's been really fascinating. I want to thank our trustees of the Manuscript Society and the staff for allowing us to present these, and certainly you more than anything else for being part of the program. If you got interested in more programs on the way, right now we don't have anything scheduled for 2024. We do have something come up in December that I'm going to tell you about. If you have a topic you'd like to see, a program you'd like to present, let me know. You can reach me at, I'll give you that email in just a bit. If you'd like to underwrite these programs, let me know, and I'll give you the details on doing that. Again, they've been done once a month for the past 2 years on our Manuscript Monday. Here's what's coming up next on December 4th. we have a program called Thanksgiving Leftovers, and that's going to be more of a meeting style rather than a webinar. So you'll be on camera, you'll be on mic, you'll be able to share information about favorite item in your collection, something you're looking for, a story you have to tell. You won't get 40 minutes like Ken got tonight, but you'll get a few minutes depending on how many people are there. That is not me or any of my relatives, but that's kind of what we do the day after Thanksgiving. That's why we call this one Thanksgiving Leftovers. And with that, I am going to tell you that if you're not a Manuscript Society member, I am shocked. Actually, we're inviting you here too. You can join the Manuscript Society by going to manuscript.org if you need more information. It's you can email me at my first name, at my last name, Brian at Cathanis. A lot of things going up. So with that, I'm going to turn my camera off and my mic off, and I'm going to see what questions we have for Ken. I'm just going to shrink this down a little bit, Ken, so I can see what's going on here a little bit better. And I'll stop sharing my screen as well and give you, put you back in. I'm going to stop my video. I see no questions coming up at the moment, but if somebody wanted to learn more about how to collect rare books, what to look for, are there references, are there articles, are there stories where people should go and where they could kind of begin or learn more about the whole process?
Well, I'm assuming a lot of the people who are watching this, but I say the best way to do it, there are books about book collecting, there's everything, but it's more going to book shows, book fairs. Antiquarian Bookmen's Association, they sponsor 3 or 4 fairs during the year. Coming into used and rare bookstores are a great way. One of the things that I always say is ask questions. I love what I do. I absolutely love it. And most people who are in the autograph business, the manuscript business, the rare book business, also love what they do. Now, that's not 100%. And most of them, if you ask them a question, the problem isn't getting an answer. It's getting them to stop answering. So, and one of the reasons that I like to say go into like book shows if you're just beginning, because you'll see 150 dealers from all over the world. And you might see people who have autographs and manuscripts, many members of the Manuscript Society, and actually be able to see letters of George Washington or many other people. They're there. Or there might be first editions of children's books or science books. So you might go in thinking that you really like this, and by the time you get through the show, you leave liking something else.
That sounds dangerous to me.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. And going into bookstores, again, each one is different because the book business, the autograph manuscript business, even the largest of us on the scale of American business are tiny. And each one tends to take on the personality of the owner. And in most of the cases, the owners are somewhat of characters. And so you get to know people that you like, that you want to do business with, that get along with you. They might both be perfectly good, but one personalities clash. So be aware that can happen. But
that sounds great.
The more places you go, the more things you do, the better. And also, you have to focus in on something you really like, because nobody can collect everything about everything. Someone tried it once. You can't do it.
Didn't work. Okay, great. Hey, Brad has a question. Brad's our editor of our Manuscript Society Journal, who does an outstanding job. He's out there doing it every day. And our latest issue was just released. Shirley just sent it out today. He asks, what is the most unusual book collection you have come across? Odd subject, etc.
Well, of course, when people get excited about coconuts and constipation, you have to wonder what can be unusual. Well, one of the things when people ask about unusual collections, there are people who collect one book. We had a customer who had 3,000 copies of Walden, literally.
Of one different.
All they collected was Walden, but
Wow.
3,000. They had first edition in every color binding, all the way through paperbacks, foreign languages, and so on. And actually, it was a fascinating collection because by looking at the bindings, the illustrations over the years, you can sort of see at certain times what people thought of Walden and how they observed it and what they thought about it. So at first you think it's really unusual, but then you realize I one time bought a collection of 1,500 copies of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and that was just touching the surface. Now, one of the collecting things though that made an incredible indelible impression on me is I used to give talks. There in a local school, the fifth grade had a career day, and they would have the last day they'd have a radio announcer in, a diver from the aquarium, a musician. They had a sociologist who specialized in serial killing, and they had me. And what I used to do to try to encourage the kids, I would always, there were 60 of them, usually. I'd bring in 150-year-old newspapers, and I'd bring in one for each kid. And, usually you figure, well, they'll take it home, they'll like it. But this was one of the more unusual, not unusual bad, but really gratifying. You sometimes get thank you notes. And one 10-year-old wrote to me and he said, well, I don't really collect books or newspapers or all that, but I collect coins. And he says, I have a coin from 1852, I think it was, and that was the same year of the newspaper you gave me. Oh, I wonder if somebody had bought that newspaper with that coin.
Isn't that
the fact that a 10-year-old was putting that together, first of all, it's really unusual that someone would do that. But second of all, that they would even make that association. And there I could see a real collector, dealer.
Yeah, it works. That's great. Dr. Ellis has his hand up. Dick, I'm going to unmute you or allow you to unmute yourself if you'd like to chat and have a question. Go ahead, Dick, you're up.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Mr. Gloss, and also I wanted to ask him that podcast that he mentioned, because I love his stories and I want to hear more of them. But I wonder if he could repeat the podcast that he tells the stories on.
It's called Brattlecast. So Brattlecast. And if you go to our website, it's on the website too, but Brattlecast. And I've got about 120. I put out one every 2 weeks. And I just sort of ramble on with the host and so on. Now, when you were at the previous call, well, listen, enjoy it. When you were asking what some of the unusual, one time we got an order for 6,000 red books. Someone wanted 6,000 books, but they all had to be a shade of red.
No kidding.
Well, it sounds really, well, we did it. We got them their 6,000 books. It sounds really strange. And we do a lot of movies. Matter of fact, there's a new movie that just came out called The Holdovers with Paul Giamatti. They filmed about a minute and a half of the movie is at our bookstore. So if any of you go, it's a good movie, but
that's wild. Good.
But
so we're towards the end. So if you have if you want to wrap us up here, you said you had a question, a comment or two you want to wrap up with.
A couple of comments.
Give me that time.
Okay. A lot of times I get asked, what's the most valuable book? What's the most valuable thing that I've had? And I've had Curtis's Indians. We've had books signed by Lincoln and Washington and on and on and on. The most valuable book I have it's in people, when they start describing it, it's a 1980s or so book. It's The Night Before Christmas. It's a beautiful, beautiful edition of The Night Before Christmas. But that copy of The Night Before Christmas, I have read to my daughters every single Christmas Eve that they have been alive. And to the point where one of my daughters is married to a man from Texas. Now, they live near us, but a lot of times they'll go to Texas for Christmas. And before FaceTime, I even recorded it on YouTube so that Christmas Eve, she could have me reading that copy of The Night Before Christmas to her. Now with FaceTime, I do it. I have my 3 grandchildren. 2 of the grandchildren live near here. I've read that copy to them. My other daughter lives in Nairobi, And my grandson and her, I read it to them. I just have to allow 8 hours time. That copy of The Night Before Christmas means more to me. It's more valuable to me than any other book I have. And matter of fact, one of my older daughter keeps it safe. She's afraid someday I'd sell it, but I never would. But that's the most valuable book I ever had. And I'd like to end quickly on talking about Bibles. And the reason I like to finish the talk about Bibles is the Bible is the most commonly printed book of all time, always has been, always will be. We sometimes get 5 and 10 calls a week with people who have 100, 200-year-old family Bibles. Most cases we have to say to them, if this is your family Bible, it's been handed down through the generations, sentimentally, it's priceless. Monetarily, not so much. The big old Victorian Bibles with a beautiful leather clasp, mint condition, $100, $300, break a class, they drop all that. Sometimes the birth test marriages, that can be important to historical societies, but all they want to do is photocopy that. There are exceptions. You can have the Gutenberg Bible, you can have others, so it's always worth checking. But I got a call one time from a large old church in Boston, well over 100 years old, had a huge library. They wanted me to look through and see if they had any valuable books, just accumulated. Spent a day there. They had some good books. It was fun. End of the day, the priest says to me, can you come down the basement? There are some more books. Look at the more books. And then there's sort of a closet, almost a small room off in the corner of the basement of the church. Priest opens the door. Floor to ceiling, top to bottom, front to back, it is stuffed with thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest and I said, what is this? And the priest said, well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. So what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want the Bible? They come and they present it to the church. And he says, what do? We very graciously accept it. We don't want to offend anybody. And then we go downstairs, open the door, put it in with the rest of them. And he says, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That just would be terrible. So I use it as an example to say, if you want to give something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want and can use it, great. If not, you're not doing anyone a favor. And like I say, that's sort of where I end this. And if you ever have questions, call. I love talking about books. And if you're in Boston, stop by.
There you go. Thank you, Ken. There were a couple of questions that came up. We're running out of time. I think we got Pat's question answered. It looks like we have another topic for you sometime down the road because people are going to talk about determining the value of books, which is a whole separate subject, which I'm sure we'll do. And Al Ottens asked, speaking of odd items, does anyone collect books that stop the bullet and save the life of the owner? You have 30 seconds to answer.
Well, there are books that people have collected that I've had that have bullet holes. I've never been able to authenticate that. But if you had, can you imagine having that Bible that Roosevelt had in his pocket?
Speech, Teddy
depending
Roosevelt
on the situation, yep. It could be great. If anyone has questions, you can always email or get in touch. I'd be more than happy, though, to come back and talk about it.
Sounds great. Our guest has been Ken Gloss from Brattlebrook Books, and we're so happy you were here. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next month right here on Manuscript Monday. Good night, y'all.
And thank you all for listening. Thank you.